Calling People versus James Crumbly, docket number 2100661, and People versus Jennifer Crumbly, docket number 2100662. Now, appearances on the record, starting with the prosecutor, please.
Tina McDonald, hearing on behalf of the people.
Thank you, Judge. Mark Keast on behalf of the people.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm Shannon Smith on behalf of Jennifer Crumbly.
Good morning, Your Honor. Marielle Lehman on behalf of James Crumbly.
Today is the date time set for continuation of the preliminary examination. Are all parties ready to proceed?
Yes, Judge.
Yes, Your Honor.
We are, Your Honor. I have one minor matter to take up with the court, if you could, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. The last time we were here, we requested that the court allow our clients to be uncuffed, to allow them to more easily write and take notes and send us notes as we're doing our cross-examination and listening to witness testimony. The court left it up to the sheriff's office, and the last time we were here, one of the deputies indicated that they were not comfortable uncuffing either of our clients due to their status. Your Honor, we're making that request again, that you allow them to at least uncuff one hand. I'm certain that the court watched the hearing in circuit court with the shooter in this case, or in the other case, and he was allowed to uncuff. So we're asking that the court or the sheriff's office allow our clients to at least uncuff one hand to allow them to more easily write notes. Also, if the court recalls, the last time we were here, there was an issue with the media zooming in or taking photographs of our clients' notes. So I would ask that the court allow them to uncuff at least one hand to allow our communication to be more easy.
Well, I'm going to defer to the sheriff's department at this point in time. Who's responsible for the...
Our policy is to leave them cuffed. As far as my call would be, that's the policy, is to leave them cuffed.
Now, I don't know that you can cuff into those chairs. Can you do one cuff to a chair?
Your Honor, in every hearing I've ever had, when a judge has said to uncuff the defendant, they've been uncuffed.
I understand it. This is a little bit different situation. I have to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. So, there's been occasions in the past where I haven't allowed the defendant to be uncuffed, especially if I've had issues with them in terms of behavior or concerns regarding any security. So at this point, I'm just going to ask the deputy, is there an ability to cuff them to have one cuff to a chair so that they can write with the dominant hand?
If you are telling me to do that, I'm doing it.
Can you do that with these chairs is what I'm asking you.
I believe so.
Pardon me?
I believe so.
Okay. If you can, I will allow one cuff to the chair, one dominant hand for the purposes of writing.
Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Thank you, Dr.
Judge, before we begin testimony, I think it's important to bring up the potential conflict issue.
Go ahead. In terms of at every hearing, the court has reiterated with both counsel and with the defendants relative to potential conflict of interest due to the fact that these defendants are co-defendants. Both attorneys are from the same law firm. At the last hearing, the attorneys indicated for purposes of alleviating to a certain extent that conflict that each attorney would only be representing each one of the defendants. I just want to make sure that the defendants are still okay with that process, so I'm going to start with Mr. James Crumbly. Mr. Crumbly, you understand that potential conflict of interest exists in this case as it relates to your attorneys representing both of you because the attorneys are from the same law firm. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
And do you understand that your interest in terms of you being co-defendants could be disparate at some point in time during the course of these proceedings, and a conflict may arise? Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
And at this point in time, are you willing to waive that potential conflict of interest and continue with your attorney, which is Ms. Lehman?
Yes, Your Honor.
And Ms. Crumbly, do you also understand that potential conflict of interest as it relates to your representation with Ms. Smith, because Ms. Smith and Ms. Lehman are from the same law firm, and that you potentially have disparate interests when it comes to your co-defendant?
Yes, Your Honor.
And at this point in time, are you willing to waive that conflict?
Yes, Your Honor.
And you want to proceed with Ms. Smith being your counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
Right.
Judge, the only thing I would add is that as was apparent from the February hearing, there's separate evidence as to each defendant, so I just want that made clear that each defendant knows that there's separate evidence to each defendant and waive that respect as well.
Do you both understand that, Mrs. Crumbly?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Crumbly?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Judge.
Let's go ahead and continue. When we broke last time, Detective Bobrowski was on the stand.
Yes, Judge, he's here in the hallway. And Judge, for the record, I did email both defense counsel the day after the preliminary examination, provided step-by-step instructions on how a layperson would be able to go through a Cellbrite reader report and export certain data extractions. So I think we're all on the same page there.
And Your Honor, not only did they do that, but they also provided us with a file that had all of the text. So we appreciate that and thank you.
Please raise your right hand. You solemnly swear in the testimony you're going to give will be the truth under the penalty of perjury.
Yes, ma'am.
Have a seat, please. We're going to go ahead and continue with the cross-examination. Detective Smith.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
Let's see here. The last time we were here, the prosecution introduced and admitted several exhibits through your testimony. I want to go back and ask you a couple of questions about some of those exhibits. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
And if there is an exhibit you need to see or need me to bring up to you, please let me know and I'll do that.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to start with the prosecution's exhibit number 9, which was an audio recording we listened to with Miss Pam Fine that was left for Jennifer Crumley. Do you recall that
Yes, ma'am.
message? Okay. And in that message, Miss Fine discusses how Ethan was seen looking at bullets during class time.
Okay. Yes.
And she discusses how guns may be a hobby and there's nothing wrong with that, correct?
Correct.
And ultimately, she says, you can call me back, otherwise have a great holiday. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
From listening to that voicemail, there was no request or demand that Jennifer Crumley call Miss Fine back.
Correct.
Okay. So in the media, there has been statements about Ms. Crumley received a phone call or a message and did not respond to it. That message did not require a response. The one with Ms. Fine, is that correct?
If I'm going to object to the form of question right now, he's not here to testify what was reported in the media. He can testify to what was actually extracted from the cell phones. He's a fact witness.
So your objection is?
It's improper questioning for this witness, Judge.
Form?
Yes, Judge.
Response?
Your Honor, the witness testified extensively about what was in the recording. I'm just asking a question about the recording.
You can rephrase the question so that it complies with the Michigan Rules of Evidence.
The exhibit with the voicemail did not require or even ask for a callback from Ms. Crumley, correct?
Correct.
In the voicemail, there was additionally no request for the parents to do anything specific with respect to their son, correct?
Correct.
And when you reviewed text messages between Ethan and his mother, there was a conversation that was admitted as Exhibit 10 about that voicemail, correct?
Correct.
And like I said, if you don't recall the exhibit, just let me know. In the text exchange between Jennifer Crumley and Ethan, Jennifer texts over to him, her text starts off, seriously looking up bullets in school, question mark, is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
And Ethan provides an answer to her about what he was doing.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I said Ethan provides an answer about what he was looking up.
I believe, can I see a copy of that? I just want to make sure.
Sure.
Okay, you originally retained the original exhibits that were admitted into evidence, so the prosecutor has the original ones.
Would you like me to use the marked copy?
I would.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, I'm sorry, what was your question?
My question was just that there was a conversation between Ethan and Jennifer about what he was doing at school, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And Ethan is providing explanations that it was completely harmless, correct?
That's what the text message says, yes, ma'am.
And Jennifer tells him that they left a voicemail about the incident.
Correct.
And Ethan explains how he doesn't want to get in trouble and gives a little more explanation about why he was looking at bullets.
Correct.
He says things like it was a harmless act, teachers give me no privacy, things along those lines, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And based on the text, you can also see that Ethan wanted to hear the voicemail when he got home, and Jennifer said, I saved it, meaning she saved the voicemail. Is that your understanding of that exhibit?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, continuing on through that exhibit, Ms. Crumbly is saying things to Ethan along the lines of, are you okay? You know you can talk to us. We won't judge you. Things along those lines, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Can you
And
just clarify the date that you're referring to?
I am referring to, that's on page 292. The text would have been on 11:30 at 12:38:04. And Ethan is telling his mother, after she says she'll talk to him, they won't judge him, thank you and I love you, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And based on the voicemail that Miss Fine left and the text messages between Ethan and Jennifer, there was not anything more Miss Crumbly was expected to do with regard to that voicemail, correct?
Objection is speculation, Judge. You can't testify to that.
Response to the objection?
I'm asking the witness if there was any expectation that Miss Crumbly would do anything.
It's speculation.
I think it's speculation as well. To sustain the objection, rephrase the question, please.
Okay. Based on the conversation between Ethan and his mother, it appears they were going to talk about the voicemail later at home, correct?
Judge, I'm sorry, speculation. Again, this witness cannot testify to what things may be interpreted as. He can only testify to what he extracted from the phone. The evidence speaks for itself.
Rephrase the question.
The conversation between Ethan and Jennifer clearly states that Ethan wants to see the voicemail when he gets home.
Correct.
Now, whatever happened when Ethan got home, you are not aware of, correct?
Yes, ma'am, correct.
If there were text messages that had more information, and it was important to this case, you would have certainly brought them in.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm turning now to exhibits 11 and 12, and I just want to make sure that I understand those correctly. 11 and 12 were the Instagram user exports of Jennifer Crumbly and James Crumbly. Do you recall those two exports?
Yes, ma'am.
And those two exports show the username for both Jennifer and James on each exhibit.
Correct.
The information does not show who they follow or what they comment on or what they do on Instagram. Is that correct?
I believe, if I could see it, it states in the report that they are following that particular person.
I believe that that's an exhibit that comes to down the road.
Okay.
This one is just the exhibit, and would you like to see it?
Yes, please.
11 and 12?
Yes.
Judge, I'm going to have the original binder up here for council use. Or is it?
Thank you. Okay, so I will bring you 11 and 12. And if I can take back this one, I'll put this back in the binder. Okay, you would agree with me that on exhibits 11 and 12, it only shows the usernames that Jennifer and James use on Instagram. It does not show any additional information about who they follow, what they like, anything along those lines, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And turning to exhibit 13, the prosecution admitted some photographs that were taken from Ethan Crumbly's Instagram account. Do you recall that exhibit?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you need to see the photographs in order for me to ask you questions?
Please, yes.
Okay. This is 13,
And those 11 and 12. Yeah.
11, and 12. Thank you. I'm just going to grab my notes over here. Okay, so on that, on those photographs, it appears that Ethan has an Instagram where his username is ethan.crumbly, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Are you aware of Ethan using any other usernames besides ethan.crumbly with Instagram?
Yes, ma'am.
What are the other usernames that Ethan used?
There was one that was linked to him called Daddy Vader,
Okay.
and another one, Ethan_Crumbly.
And you admitted, prosecution admitted through you, Exhibit 14, which shows that Jennifer and James followed the Ethan.Crumbly Instagram account. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, the Daddy Vader account and the Ethan_Crumbly account, you did not provide that same exhibit showing that James or Jennifer followed those two accounts, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And in fact, Jennifer and James do not follow those two accounts.
According to that device that we got the data from, correct.
And as far as you know, you cannot tell if Jennifer and James were aware those other Instagram names were used by their son.
Correct.
It's impossible to tell if Jennifer and James had any awareness that those two accounts existed.
Correct.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
With respect to Exhibit 13, which are the photographs that were posted, we can agree these were the photographs posted to Ethan's account on the Ethan.Crumbly Instagram user.
That they were posted to his account?
Well, they came from his account.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so the first couple of pictures also show various texts that people put as messages to Ethan through his account, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So, for example, on this bullet target practice picture, there were people who wrote messages like, fuck you, rotten hell, and go fuck yourself, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
So when an Instagram user posts a photograph, other people, when they see it, can comment on the photograph, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
It's fair to say that on what you did bring in from Ethan.Crumbley's account, Jennifer and James are not making comments about the photographs, correct?
Correct.
And there is no way to tell if Jennifer and James even saw those photographs.
Correct.
And even beyond that, there is still no way to tell whether they know about 2 other existing Instagram accounts that Ethan had.
Correct.
Now, there's a photo of a target, photo of a gun, another gun, and then we get into some photos on page 6 of 17, 8 of 17, of this white-faced, ghost-looking creature. Are you familiar with these?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, these appear to be photographs that were not initially posted by Ethan, but photographs that he shared, correct?
Shared and posted. He shared to his account. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. And on all of those photographs of this ghost kind of looking thing, you would agree with me that Jennifer and James did not post any comments about those photographs either.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
And as a matter of fact, when you go through Ethan's Instagram account, there's actually no evidence to show that Jennifer or James have ever been on his Instagram account, other than the fact that they technically follow it, correct?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to just put this back before I mess it up. I'm sorry, Your Honor, I don't want to get these out of order, and I already got them out of order. Let's put this in this. Okay, and so for the sake of this hearing, it's fair to say you did not print out any of the photographs or items that were on that Daddy Vader account or the Ethan_Crumbley account.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
And you did already confirm Jennifer and James do not follow those 2 accounts.
From the device that we have. Correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, the photographs that were posted on the Ethan.Crumbley account, you would agree with me it's not illegal to post photographs of a gun.
Correct.
It's not illegal to post photographs of these ghost-type figures.
Correct.
It's not illegal to post photographs of a bullet with target practice.
Correct.
And you are aware that the Crumbleys shoot guns and go to the gun range, correct?
I've seen a video of Jennifer at a gun range, yes, shooting a gun.
Okay. All right, let's see here. Exhibit 16. Okay. Exhibit 15, again, was just Instagram information. And People's Exhibit 16 was Jennifer Crumbley's Instagram photos. Is that correct?
I believe so, if I could see, yes, ma'am. Thank you. Correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and Jennifer Crumbly posted photos showing a target and that she had gone to the gun range and shot a gun, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
She posted a picture of the gun in the case, correct?
Correct.
And she posted a picture of a Christmas tree, correct?
Correct.
And in the photographs that Jennifer posted, there are no comments between Ethan and her, correct?
Correct.
The next exhibit that was admitted was number 17, which was a video that was taken by Ethan Crumbly. Do you recall that video?
Can you refresh my memory? What was the contents of the video?
The video was a video with him holding a gun.
Yes, ma'am. I remember, yes.
Okay. In that video, when you were testifying, you mentioned that you could see a gun lock in that video.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, explain what a gun lock is.
Well, that particular one actually goes through with the slide in the lock, the back position, goes through the barrel, out the front of the barrel, and then locks, so the slide can't go forward and a bullet can't be loaded into the chamber.
Okay, so on that particular gun, there is a way to lock it just within the gun itself, correct?
With the lock?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And in that video, you can't tell who else is around when that video was made.
Correct.
You can't tell if there was other people there, like if Ethan's parents were there, if friends were there, or if Ethan was alone, correct?
Correct.
The video only shows the gun, no faces. Fair to say?
Yes, ma'am.
It's not illegal to take a photograph racking a gun or handling a gun, correct?
Correct.
And I apologize, it's not illegal to take a video racking a gun or playing with a gun, correct?
Correct.
It's also not illegal to take a photograph like that and send it to a friend, correct?
Correct.
Even at Ethan's age, that's something that would not be illegal.
Without looking up the exact law, I couldn't answer that question.
Okay. Now, on Exhibit 18, there are Facebook Messenger messages between James Crumbly and Jennifer Crumbly from November 30th. Do you recall that exhibit?
Yes, ma'am.
And if you need to see the exhibit, please let me know. In this exhibit, Jennifer is saying, call now in all caps, emergency, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Then you can see that she texts James photographs of that math paperwork before it was altered and then after Ethan had written some more things on it, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
The response from James is, my God, WTF. What does WTF mean?
Usually means what the fuck.
So James's response is, my God, what the fuck? Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
And the two of them go back and forth talking about him being distraught the night before, talking about how they talked that morning, James and Ethan talked that morning, and a message from James, can you call? Does that all sound right?
Yes, ma'am. And
Jennifer texts that she's heading to his school. And ultimately she did head to his school. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Jennifer texts, I'm very concerned, headed to school. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And through these text messages, there is absolutely nothing in there to suggest, I think Ethan's going to blow up or is going to shoot a gun at the school, correct?
Correct.
There is nothing in those texts that says, I believe our son has the gun at school and is going to commit a mass shooting.
Correct.
And those texts between Jennifer and James are a very narrow selection of texts compared to all of the texts between them. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
So when you look at texts between Jennifer and James, they amount to this pile that I have sitting here. Does that look about right to you?
Oh, for what period of time are we talking about?
These would be from 6/2 of 21. Oh wait, I'm sorry. These, it's this pile. Which pile was on? Okay, I'm sorry. This is the stack of text between Jennifer and James. These are dated between 9/13/2020, and they go through 11/30 of 2021. You've had the chance to see these text messages, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So, out of the text messages belonging to James and Jen, the most important information in that stack was these couple of texts about there being an emergency at the school, and things along those lines. That's why you've testified about that in court, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And if there was any text between Jen and James or a Facebook message that said, I believe our son could be a school shooter, you certainly would have testified about that in this courtroom.
Yes, ma'am.
It's fair for us to conclude that there are no texts where Jennifer or James say, I believe our son is going to shoot up people at the school.
Correct.
There are no texts between the two of them that suggest he would do anything homicidal or anything to hurt other human beings, correct?
Between the two of them?
Yes.
Correct.
So, and throughout the text messages, there are many occasions where Jennifer and James, through the Facebook messages and text, are discussing things with regard to Ethan, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So, for example, there's several texts of, do you know where Ethan is? What time is he getting home from school? How is he riding? Is he getting a ride home, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
There are all kinds of texts about Ethan's doing his schoolwork right now. What is he working on? He's working on this project. All kinds of things like that.
Correct.
So, in the grand scheme of all the texts between Jen and James, although they talk often about horses and their own things going on in their lives, we can agree they mention and discuss their son frequently.
Correct.
And by frequently, you would agree with me that at least every day from September 13th, 2020 through 11/30, there are texts where Jennifer and James are talking about their son.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
On Exhibit 19, the prosecution admitted a Celebrate report where it's highlighted that Jennifer and James had a 7-minute and 16-second call at 10:29 a.m. on 11/30. Do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. In addition to that phone call, You're also aware there are other phone calls between Jennifer and James that morning as well, correct?
Can I see the exhibit, ma'am?
Sure.
That morning, you're saying?
Yes.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
So in addition to the one you highlighted showing a 7-minute and 16 call, there's also a 32-second call, a 39-second call, a 2-minute and 44-second call, and then up at the top, we can see some calls between the two phones from the day before, correct?
Correct.
So it's fair to say that Jennifer and James were in touch with each other by phone the morning of November 30th.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
May I please approach and grab that back? Thank you. All right, Exhibit 20 was the DoorDash map. I don't have any questions about that. Exhibit 21, the people admitted that from Jennifer's device, it appeared she Googled or searched for research clinical depression treatment options. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you don't know if she was researching clinical depression treatment options for herself, or for her son, or for, you don't know who that was regarding, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
It doesn't say in the search who she was looking for, correct?
Correct.
So, and in addition to that, that's the only search that you provided for this court, although I imagine Jennifer searched for many, many things on her phone at various points in time, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
And if you had seen something in one of Jennifer's searches, like homicidal child, or what do I do if I believe my son is going to shoot students at a school, you would have brought those searches into this court and shown them to us, correct?
Correct.
There were, in fact, no searches along that line. The closest, most relevant search you found was this research clinical depression treatment options.
Correct.
On Exhibit 22, you admitted, the prosecution admitted through you, a couple of pages of text messages between Ethan and his mother. Do you recall seeing those?
If I could see them, just to make sure we're talking about.
Sure,
I know what
no
they were.
problem. Okay, so those texts were admitted, and they're approximately 4 or 5 pages long. Is that about right?
Three pages.
3 pages. Okay. And when you look at the total, we print out all of the texts between Ethan and Jennifer, and this is going back to June of 2020 up through 11/30 of 21. There's far more texts between Jennifer and her son than just those 3 pages, correct?
Correct.
May I approach to grab those?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, on these text messages, Ethan is saying things along the lines of, there's someone in the house, I think. Someone walked in the bathroom. I thought it was you. When I came out, no one was home. There's no one in the house, though. Dude, my door just slammed. Ethan is sending his mother a series of messages claiming there's someone in the house or there's something going on, correct?
Correct.
And in all fairness to Ethan, you don't know if there's somebody in his house, correct?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
You don't know if there really was somebody in his house, correct?
I don't correct.
And you don't know also if there are phone calls between Jen and James or between Jen and Ethan at the time that these texts are being sent, correct?
I believe we looked at that, and I don't believe there were any phone calls between them.
The way you would look at the phone calls, though, would be looking from Jennifer's cell phone to Ethan's phone, correct?
And reverse, yes.
In reverse, but if Jennifer was to use the phone at her office, like on her desk, that would not appear. That would not appear in the search in terms of a call between her and Ethan, correct?
On Ethan's phone, it would.
Did you look to see if on Ethan's phone there were calls?
Yes.
And you didn't find any calls?
I don't recall any, no.
The time these messages are sent, the truth is we don't know if there was someone in the house or what was going on, correct?
Correct.
It's impossible for us to take 3 pages of text messages and understand the complete context.
Object to the form of the question, Your Honor. That's a decision for this court to make.
I'm sustaining. Go ahead and reverse first.
It's, whenever we're looking at text messages, the text messages don't say the context within which they were texted, correct?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. I apologize.
I think it's a bad question, and that's my fault.
Okay.
I'm going to move on.
Okay.
Exhibit 23 continues to be messages between Ethan and his mother. Do you recall admitting those, or providing those to the prosecution and them being admitted as Exhibit 23?
I believe I do. If I can just look at it real quick. Thank you. Okay, I remember these. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And these text messages mostly start off with Ethan texting his mother that he believes the house is haunted, that weird things are happening and he's scared the house is haunted. He claims he got some videos and a picture of a demon, correct?
Correct.
Now, in looking in his phone, you found no videos that would match what Ethan's talking about, correct?
Correct.
You found no photographs of demons, correct?
Yeah, correct.
And Ethan says here, I am not joking, it fucked up the kitchen. In all honesty, you have no way of knowing whether Ethan's joking overall or not, correct?
Correct.
When Jennifer does respond to the messages, she immediately starts asking, where's your dad? Text me when you're done. Are you done yet? Correct?
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
She doesn't really give any answer to all of the, I think our house is haunted kind of texts, correct?
Correct.
And when it comes down to what Ethan was texting, you never saw any evidence that bowls had been thrown and caused any damage, correct?
Correct.
There really is nothing to corroborate these claims Ethan is making about the house being haunted.
Correct.
Exhibit 24, 25, 26, 27 were all photographs of horses, Jennifer with a horse, James with a horse. We can agree they like horses.
Correct.
And these horse photos were taken on one day when Ethan was trying to get a hold of his parents. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And out at the farm, when James and Jennifer are on the horses, I'm sorry, I'll strike that. So the point of these exhibits was just to show there was some moments in time where Ethan could not get a hold of his parents. Is that a fair statement?
Judge, again, I could object to the question.
Sustained.
The photographs that you provided are to show where Jennifer and James were when they were not with Ethan, correct?
Correct.
And they were taken at a time when Ethan was trying to get a hold of his mom and dad.
Correct.
Now, in terms of the text messages that exist between Jennifer and Ethan, and this is going back to June 28th of 2020 through 11/30 of 2021, it's fair to say that there are, this is my printed version, but there are many, many more texts than just these couple of pages that you admitted, correct?
Correct.
And the pages that you admitted would be the most important evidence out of all of the texts for this court to see, correct?
Correct.
And if there were texts in here between Jen and Ethan where Ethan is saying, I'm going to blow up a school, I am going to hurt people, I feel homicidal, anything along those lines, you would have brought those texts into court and shown them to this audience, correct?
Correct.
And those type of texts do not exist in what you've seen between Jennifer Crumbly and Ethan.
Correct.
All right, turning to Exhibit 28, there was a conversation between James and Jennifer Crumbly that was admitted as People's Exhibit 28. Do you need to see those
Please, yes, ma'am.
exchanges?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
These texts are Jennifer and James talking about something that happened the night before with Ethan. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
And they are talking about how is he doing and what he needs to do to get his stuff back, correct?
Correct.
In these text messages, the parents confirm he's just doing school, is he okay to work, things along those lines, correct?
Correct.
And in the end, the parents are just discussing what was possibly an argument the night before.
Something that, yeah, I don't know if I can answer that question.
Just again, I have to object to the form of the question, and again, this witness can't interpret the text messages that he has extracted. He can only verify that they came from the device they always do.
I agree, and I'll ask the question a different way. This conversation between Jennifer and James does not say anything about thinking that their son is a danger to other people, correct?
Correct.
It does not say anything about thinking Ethan would hurt anyone.
Correct.
And again, when you look at all of the texts and messages between James and Jen, there is nothing like that in those messages.
Correct.
And if there was something like that in those messages, you would have brought it to the court's attention.
Correct.
The items that you provided and that were admitted through the prosecution is what you believe to be the most important evidence out of everything you've reviewed.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Exhibit 29 were messages admitted between Ethan and a friend of his regarding voices and going to a doctor. Do you recall those messages?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you want to see those? Or
Yes, please. Yes, please.
I'm handing you Exhibit 29.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
within these messages, Ethan is saying that he's going to ask his parents to go to the doctor tomorrow or Tuesday again, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Ethan states, this time I am going to tell them about the voices.
Correct.
When Ethan says them, we have no way of knowing, it's not identified, if it was his parents or the doctor that
Correct.
he would tell about voices, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And when Ethan writes, I only told them about the people I saw, again, we don't know who them is.
Correct.
At the end, when Ethan says, like, I am mentally and physically dying, we don't know if Ethan really feels like he's mentally and physically dying or if he's just exaggerating, correct?
His words were that, but yeah, correct. I don't know what his mindset was.
You don't know what his mindset was or the context of what was going on at the time he typed that, correct?
Correct.
And again, if you had seen messages saying things like, I am going to shoot up the school, I am going to kill people, making plans for this, those are text messages that you would have brought in for this court, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And this is the best evidence that you found that you think is relevant. This conversation about going to the doctors and telling them about various things.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And we don't even know who them is.
Correct.
Exhibits 30 and 31 were videos that Ethan took on 8/19 and 8/20. Do you recall those two videos?
That were in the text thread, those two?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's fair to say that in those two videos, again, you cannot see any people in those, you can't see the faces of any people in those videos.
Correct.
You can't see who was around at the time the videos are made.
Correct.
There's no description about why those videos were made.
Correct.
All we know is that those two videos were made and that Ethan texted those two videos to his friend Brady.
Correct. With some conversation, correct.
With some conversation, okay. But in the grand scheme of things, the taking the videos he took was not illegal.
Well, him possessing the gun at that time, unless I know the exact, I don't know, I don't want to answer with him having that gun being illegal and what was going on in the video.
Okay, fair enough.
Your Honor, may counsel on approach?
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about those videos that he sent to a friend, and your testimony was that there was some conversation between him and the friend, and that conversation was admitted as Exhibit 32. Would you like to see Exhibit 32? So I can
Yes,
ask
ma'am,
you
please.
some questions? Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just
For the
so,
record, I have 6 pages for exhibit 32, is that what you have as well?
Yes, ma'am. Six.
So,
okay, so on the first page, we can see that video was sent to Ethan's friend,
Correct?
and there's discussion about inviting his friend to the gun range,
Correct?
and we can see that Ethan sends another video to his friend,
Correct?
and the friend is saying things like, nice, now pull the trigger, JK, JK, JK. What is your understanding of what JK, JK, JK means?
Just kidding.
So just kidding, just kidding, just kidding. And those are all things the friend says to Ethan. Nice, now pull the trigger, JK, 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 correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And Ethan responds about how his dad left the gun out, but he knows gun safety, so it's no problem, correct?
Correct.
And then he says, now it's time to shoot up the school, and in capital letters, JK, 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 correct?
Correct.
So this conversation existed between Ethan and his friend,
Correct.
but there is not any kind of conversation like this between Ethan and his mother
Correct.
or Ethan and his father.
Correct.
Now, the last time we were in court, the prosecution ended by asking you about some of the conversations that Ethan and Brady would have, and your testimony was that they talked about disturbing things, including the bird head, hurting another girl at school, and mentioned some of the other topics between Ethan and Brady. Do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am.
And Ethan and Brady's text messages, if I told you that it's this entire pile is the communications between Ethan and Brady, would that surprise you?
I believe there are about 25,000, so it looks about right.
25,000 messages, about 5,000 pieces of paper when you print it out.
Looks about right.
And you would agree with me that while there was conversations about the bird head and hurting another student, Ethan and Brady talked about way, way, way more topics than just those types of things, correct?
Correct.
They talk about playing different video games, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
They talk about how much they eat versus how big their stool is when they go to the bathroom.
I don't recall that exact one right now, but
They talk about silly boy things.
yes, ma'am.
They talk about other students.
Yes, ma'am.
They talk about homework.
Correct.
What you've pulled out to share with this court, it's fair to say it's a very small section compared to the grand scheme of what Ethan and his friend talk about.
Correct.
Okay. And again, you pulled out what you believe is the most important information for this courtroom.
Yes, ma'am.
And these are between Ethan and Brady. You don't have any, it doesn't appear that Jennifer or James are grouped into any of these messages, correct?
Correct.
It appears these messages are strictly between those two boys. Is that true?
Yes, ma'am.
It's also fair to say that a topic Ethan talks about with Brady is hiding things from his parents, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
He talks about hiding the bird head and what he's doing with birds from his parents.
Yes, ma'am.
He talks about efforts he's making to wait until his parents leave the house so he can do things and not get caught, correct?
Correct.
There certainly is nothing in those texts that show my mom and dad know I'm cutting off the head of a bird and support me doing this, correct?
Correct.
And if there was anything like that with respect to Jennifer or James, you would have brought those messages into court, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And in the grand scheme of all the messages between Ethan and Brady, there is nothing to indicate that Jennifer or James were told or were aware of a plan to commit a school shooting like what happened at Oxford High School on 11/30.
Correct.
In fact, Ethan discusses repeatedly hiding things from his parents
Yes, ma'am.
and doing it when they're not home.
Correct.
Your Honor, may I have just one moment to check in with my client? I have nothing further for this witness. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mario. That's the exhibit of what's admitted. Do you want these of James and Nine?
No.
Okay, do you need Ethan Brady?
No, I figured it. I said. You can use them up here. Good afternoon, or good morning, Detective.
Good morning.
I just have a few questions for you. So obviously you reviewed a massive number of text messages
Yes, ma'am.
and Facebook messages.
Yes, ma'am.
And you also reviewed text messages between James and his son.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
And it's fair to say that there weren't a lot of messages between James and his son.
Correct.
But in reviewing messages between James and Jennifer, you note that James was with Ethan quite a bit. Would that be fair?
Yes.
In fact, there were often times where James was answering questions that Jennifer had and he was with Ethan, right?
Correct.
And in the messages between James and Jen, or between Ethan and James, you don't see anything where Ethan was asking James for help. Is that fair? Let me clarify. You don't see any messages from Ethan to James where he was saying he needed help mentally, correct?
Not that I recall. Correct.
Or that he needed help because he was going to do something bad. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
And you don't see any messages from James to Jennifer or from Jennifer to James saying that Ethan had given them that information. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
And staying with the messages, the 5,000 or 6,000 pages between Brady and Ethan, between the minor and Ethan, there's nothing that you recall seeing where Ethan indicated that he'd said anything to his parents. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
If that had happened, if you had seen those messages, you would have advised the prosecution.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, stepping away from the messages, I think we've covered them sufficiently. Also, while you were in court last time, there was a recording played. I believe it was, let's see which exhibit. Exhibit 5, which was a recording of James Crumley calling 911.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am.
And in the recording, James James called 911, is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
Nobody called him.
Correct.
Okay. James voluntarily called 911
Yes.
and reported that his handgun was missing
Correct.
and his ammunition,
Correct.
and that his son was a student at Oxford High School
Correct.
and he had some concerns.
Correct.
You also saw, and I said I was going to stay away from the text messages, but you also saw that James texted Ethan that morning. Is that fair?
Yes. Correct.
He texted him after getting a call about the math homework or the math test and the drawings.
Correct.
And he texted him when James suspected that something was happening at the school. Do you recall that text message?
Yes.
He checked in on him. Is that
Correct.
fair?
Yes, ma'am.
And that text message wasn't, Ethan, are you the shooter? Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
In fact, he just asked if something was happening at the school.
Correct.
He called Ethan. Do you
Yes.
recall that? And then he texted Ethan again.
Correct.
And he asked Ethan to call him.
Correct.
And then he called Ethan more.
Correct.
And then he called 911.
Correct.
And you created a timeline. I believe it was your timeline that was created of phone calls and messages and various things from November 30th of 2021. Part of that timeline is one of the exhibits.
Can you tell me which one you're referring to?
Yes. Exhibit 19, the call logs extract.
Yeah, that's from the call logs. It's not from the timeline of the phone, but yes.
Okay. But you reviewed various phone calls, incoming, outgoing, text messages, incoming, outgoing to James Crumbly's phone. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall also seeing phone calls and text messages with Sergeant Bryan from the Sheriff's Office?
It wasn't labeled. There's an 858 number I recall seeing, which is phone numbers from the 38 East Sheriff's Office. I don't know what Sergeant Joe Bryan's phone number is, and it wasn't labeled his name.
But you recall seeing phone calls from an 858 phone number?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall there being multiple phone calls with the 858 number? Or do you not? If you don't recall.
I don't recall.
Okay. From what you remember in reviewing the phone calls, you didn't see anything that would indicate that James wasn't responding to any phone calls. Is that fair?
Correct.
Now, when you were testifying at our last hearing, you made specific mention that James Crumbly was the owner of the cell phones on the account. Is that correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Now, it's fair to say that parents get cell phones for their kids all the time. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
And they may say it's Johnny's cell phone, correct?
Name it Johnny's cell phone? What do you mean? Or
No, a parent may say it's Johnny's cell phone. Give Johnny a cell phone, it's Johnny's cell phone.
yes, ma'am.
But it's actually the parent's phone, correct?
Correct.
Or they may do it for their spouse or significant other. Is that
Yes,
fair?
ma'am.
Now, it isn't expected that simply because somebody is listed as an owner of the phone, that they know everything that that the user is doing on the phone. Is that fair?
Actually, speculation does.
I'm going to sustain, rephrase the question, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Let me ask you. You're not aware of any time where the listed owner of the phone has been responsible for what the user has done. Is that fair?
Objection, Judge. In proper form. It's not relevant.
Your Honor, as for relevance, I would argue that it is relevant.
I'm overruling this relevance. Go ahead, you can answer the question if you can.
Okay, I have the question again, please.
Sure. You're not aware of any times that the listed owner of a cell phone has been held responsible for what the user of the phone has done with the phone.
Judge, objection, sorry. It's an improper form of question. It's a compound question. It calls for a legal conclusion, and it's overly broad.
Your Honor,
She's asking him what he knows at this point in time. I'm overruling the objection. Go ahead and answer the question.
Now, just for clarification, are you referring to James and Ethan's phones? Like, is he responsible to look at his phone, or I'm sorry, I don't understand the question completely.
fine.
I wanna-
let's take it step by step.
Okay.
Somebody goes to a cell phone store and purchases cell phones.
Yes, correct.
Correct. And they purchase the cell phones in their own name, correct?
Yep.
And then they can distribute the cell phones to whom they choose. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And they can give those cell phones to their children
Correct.
or their significant other
Correct.
or a stranger on the street.
Sure.
Sure. My question is, you're not aware of a time that the person who purchased those phones in their name would be responsible for what the other people that they gave the phones to did on those phones.
I would have to say depend on who the people are they gave the phone to. If it's a juvenile, I would say yes.
You're not aware of a time where the owner has been held responsible for what the juvenile did on the phone. Is that fair?
Fair, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify something regarding a few. So I'm going back to the text messages again. I apologize.
It's okay.
There were text messages in Exhibit 22, which I believe are the text messages between the other minor and Ethan,
Okay, yes, ma'am.
or between Ethan and his mother. I don't recall if you looked at the dates, but those were March of 2021.
Sounds familiar. Yes, ma'am.
And you don't recall seeing anything after March of 2021 in any of the thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of text messages that you looked at. Is that fair?
March of 2021, and whose text threads?
So the first text thread, that was a really bad question, thank you.
Okay.
So the first text thread I'm asking about is between Ethan and his mom. And it
Okay.
was talking about the noises and the sounds in the house and...
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And my partner discussed that with you a little bit. But that was March of 2021. And you don't recall any messages after that section that we looked at. You don't recall any messages after that about the voices or anything like that?
Referring to that conversation?
Correct.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And you don't recall anything in any other text threads about the voices or the noises or anything like that?
Correct.
And just one point of clarification, Exhibit 32, which is it's the text thread between the other minor and Ethan. And I believe that was the text thread that had the videos.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, the firearm in those videos was not the firearm that was used on November 30th. Is that correct?
Correct.
One moment, Your Honor. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Anybody go ahead?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Do you want these?
Detective, it's fair to say, isn't it, that the evidence that we've admitted in this preliminary examination, not a trial, but preliminary examination, is a snapshot of the digital evidence you reviewed on these phones?
Correct, yes, sir.
Okay. And this evidence speaks for itself. If it's on the phone, it's on the phone. If it's not on the phone, then it's not there, right?
Correct.
Okay. You also testified on February the 8th that some information, at least from Jennifer Crumley's Facebook account, was deleted.
Your Honor, I don't object to believing the nature of these questions. This is redirect and not cross.
I can rephrase. Do you recall testifying on February the 8th of this year?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You recall being asked about a screenshot from Kira Pennick to Jennifer Crumley?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you also testified then that particular Facebook message wasn't on Jennifer Crumley's device.
Correct.
And do you recall why?
The Messenger app was deleted.
Okay, so what does that mean? Tell me about that.
When it's deleted,
Yeah.
the user tells the phone to wipe it from the phone. I no longer want to use it, and it wipes the databases off the phone to preserve storage on the device overall.
So according to your review, Jennifer Crumley deleted the Facebook Messenger app off of her phone.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you were asked about the Instagram account of Ethan.Crumley.
Correct.
And you were able to verify that both Jennifer Crumley and James Crumley followed that Instagram account.
Correct.
Okay. On February the 8th, you were asked about who posted and who didn't post, and if you could verify that on the Ethan.Crumley account. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Did you do some research in that regard?
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that, please.
So the pictures that were there all had an uploaded IP address, and I did it again just last night. There were a total of 8 of them, IP addresses. And you can go, there's a website that tells you who actually owns that IP address. Not the particular person, not Ed Wogrowski, but Comcast or Verizon or T-Mobile. And 7 of the 8 IP addresses were owned by T-Mobile, which is the phone carrier that the Crumbleys had. And then the 8th one was owned by Charter Communications, which was the internet service provider.
So does that give you a little bit of a degree of certainty as to where those photographs came from?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and tell me why.
Because, again, that's the T-Mobile, the IPs that are owned by T-Mobile is a phone carrier that they use, that all 3 of them used, and Charter Communications is the internet service provider in that area.
Okay. You were just asked about Exhibit 18, which is the portion of the Facebook Messenger thread between Jennifer and James Crumley from November the 30th of 2021.
Correct?
Okay.
Yep.
Now, there are no other Facebook messages between the two of them on November the 30th of 21. Is that right?
Correct.
So you didn't take some out and leave some in. Is that right?
No, sir. Correct.
Okay. And those are all messages from that particular date between those two.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You were also asked about phone calls between Ethan Crumley or potential phone calls between Ethan Crumley and these 2 defendants on March the 9th, 17th, and 20th.
Correct.
So I'm going to refer you to those exhibits. Exhibits 22 and 23, that's the text message thread between Ethan Crumley and Jennifer Crumley, where he talks about he's seeing demons and bowls flying off the shelves. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you went through all devices on those particular dates. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And those photographs that we admitted, the photographs of James Crumley on a horse, Jennifer Crumley on a horse, those were taken the same date and time that Ethan Crumley was texting his mother about seeing those things. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, were there any phone calls between Ethan and Jennifer Crumley during that time period?
No, sir.
Were there any phone calls between Ethan and James Crumley in that time period?
No, sir.
Were there any messages from James and Ethan Crumley?
No, sir.
And we've already verified on the 8th of this year that there were no other messages between Jennifer and Ethan Crumley in that time period.
Correct.
All right. You were asked about the entire Facebook Messenger thread between James and Jennifer Crumley. There are thousands of messages. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, were there, in your review, and again, this is a preliminary examination, not a trial, but in your review, in those messages, did you see any reference about getting Ethan Crumley help?
No, sir.
You see any reference about sending Ethan Crumley to a therapist?
No, sir.
Did you see any discussion about getting him to a doctor at all?
No, sir.
You were also asked about the text message thread between Ethan Crumley and that other juvenile. And that's the over 20,000 messages. This is the stack the council displayed to us here today, right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you were asked about a few things, but I want to go through a few more. Now, it's true, isn't it, that in June of 21, Ethan Crumley is sending messages to that friend about how he bought a Derringer.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And what is a Derringer?
It's a small handgun.
Okay. And he sent messages to that other individual. Again, we talked about the video that he sent holding the 22 Kel-Tec. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you've already testified that James Crumley did own 22 Kel-Tec.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that had context to that video, that photograph, and said, "Look what my dad left out." And you've already testified to that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in June of 21, Ethan writes, the thing is, I had over $1,000 before the Derringer, but now I only have like 900 or 800. You recall that text message?
Yes, sir.
And there's a lot of discussion between Ethan and other juvenile about wanting guns and buying guns. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And there's also a fair amount of discussion, in fact, quite a bit of discussion between those two individuals about his mental state. Would that be fair?
Yes, sir.
So you were asked about, I think counsel said, is it fair to say that Ethan Crumley talked about hiding things from his parents? You recall being asked that question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And specifically their text that Ethan Crumley sends that other juvenile that he is, quote unquote, fucked up.
Correct.
Okay. And he talks about his dark side.
Yes.
Is that one or two text messages, or are there many text messages like that?
I believe there were many.
And does he also talk to that other juvenile about trying to bring things up to his parents?
Yes.
April the 5th, isn't it true that Ethan Crumley writes, now my mom thinks I take drugs, and right after that, like she thinks the reason why I'm so mad and sad all the time because I take drugs and she doesn't worry about my mental health? Do you
Correct.
recall that?
Yes, sir.
And then he writes, they make me feel like I'm the problem.
Correct.
And that's the same text conversation, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And he also writes, my mom makes everyone feel like a piece of shit.
Yes, sir.
And Ethan many times says that he is hallucinating. Is that right?
Correct.
And in fact, he says, like I hear people talking to me and see someone in the distance.
Correct.
He says, I actually asked my dad to take to the doctor yesterday, but he just gave me some pills and told me to, quote unquote, suck it up.
Yes, sir.
Then he wrote, like it's at the point that I'm asking to go to the doctor. You remember seeing that?
Yes, sir.
And then seeing, my mom laughed when I told her.
Yes, sir.
And in that same conversation, Ethan's describing a, quote, in his words, quote unquote, breakdown to his friend. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And he writes, that's what happened when I broke down. I started sobbing in the shower and then laughing my ass off. Mental breakdown is what it's called. Said I should see a doctor if I have one. Google said they can last weeks and it can cause hallucinations. So fuck me. He wrote that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's the same text conversation where he's telling his friend that he asked his parents to see a doctor.
Correct.
And you've already testified there has been no communications between James and Jennifer Crumley about taking Ethan Crumley to see a doctor or therapist, right?
Correct.
And Ethan writes in all caps, I hear fucking people. He writes, because my life is fucked. And for context, this is taking place in April of 2021, the same time that we admitted a portion of that text message conversation in Exhibits 29 and 32. Does that sound right?
I recall it. Yes, sir.
Okay. And Ethan also writes, I also tracked the amount of sleep I've gotten in the past 5 days. I've only gotten 17 hours of sleep. And that's a text from Ethan to that other individual?
Yes, sir.
Now, in these text messages, they also talk about playing video games.
Yes.
Okay. And are you able to get a general idea of how often and what hours of the day or night that Ethan and his friend are playing video games?
Through the text message and the timeline of the phone. Yes, sir.
Okay. And tell us about that.
Well, from the conversation going back and forth, or do you want to get on, play Fortnite, get on, and play games, or the phone usage when there's downtime? If there's a downtime between 5 in the morning and 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning, you could assume that they're not using the phone.
We would object to the relevance of the amount of time spent playing video games.
It all goes to the failure to use ordinary care, Judge. These defendants are both charged with being grossly negligent.
Yes, on behalf of the defense, I'm overruling the objection. Go ahead.
Thank you. Now, did it appear that he was playing a little bit of video games or a lot of video games?
A lot of video games.
Okay. And that just didn't happen, right after school let out and before a normal bedtime, right?
Correct.
Okay, so what kind of hours was he on his devices?
All hours of the night, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning.
So this text about I've only gotten 17 hours of sleep in 5 days, that has some weight to it to you, doesn't it?
Yes, sir.
And Ethan continues about his mental breakdowns, in his words, mental breakdowns, to his friend in the juvenile, and says, I need help. I was thinking of calling 911 so I could go to the hospital, but then my parents would be really pissed. He wrote those?
I recall that. Yes, sir.
And then his friend asked him, when did all this bad shit start happening?
I would object to the leading nature of these questions. This is redirect.
Judge, counsel opened the door by asking general questions, extremely general questions to this witness about a 25,000 text message string. Now, as I pointed out, this is a preliminary examination and not a trial. So we weren't intending to go through all 25,000 text messages, but counsel opened that door. Now, she left the impression that we only selectively admitted certain messages and there's nothing else out there. And I have to correct that impression. Thank you. So his friend asked him, when did all this bad shit start happening? Excuse my language, Judge, this is just a quote. And then he wrote 2 weeks ago, is that right?
I recall that, yes, sir.
Okay, and if we're given a context, 2 weeks prior to this text would be...
Your Honor, I object to the leading nature of these questions. I don't object. I am not making a relevancy objection. I'm making an objection to the leading nature of these questions.
Judge, I'm going to ask for leeway in this particular witness with this regard to this particular piece of evidence, and that's because the nature of the evidence. Counsel made a show of this amount of evidence in the phone. She printed it out for that show specifically, and in order to effectively direct this witness to certain pieces of that evidence to rebut the impression that she so purposely laid, I have to lead the witness. I need some leeway.
I'm going to give you a little bit of leeway, but then we need to move on.
That's fair, Judge. I appreciate that.
As you said, this is a probable cause hearing. The court is perfectly aware of what the burden of proof is and what needs to be presented in order to establish that burden of proof.
Thank you, Judge. I'll just go through a few more with you, okay?
Yes, sir.
Now, we had already admitted, we talked about, I believe this was Exhibit 29. You were showing Exhibit 29. And that is that text message thread from April the 5th to his friend, okay? And that text specifically, which we were admitted, is, I'm going to ask my parents to go to the doctors tomorrow or Tuesday again, but this time I'm going to tell them about the voices. And we've already discussed that, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In these text messages in this vein, they're not, like I said, they're not just one or two text messages about this particular topic, but there are multiple, is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And you've already discussed some of the other more disturbing things you found on Ethan Crumley's phone, and I think you talked about on the last hearing about a conversation about raping and torturing and killing another classmate.
Correct, yes, sir.
And you were asked about the bird head specifically by defense counsel on cross. Now, there is a conversation in this text thread about that bird head, am I right?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, he says that he's surprised his mom didn't find the bird head because it was in his room.
Correct.
Now, these texts about his quote-unquote mental breakdown continue not just on March or April 21, but throughout the text thread when it ends abruptly at the end of October of 21.
Correct.
Right? Okay. So, approximately 7 months, there are text messages regarding the mental breakdown.
Correct.
In fact, regarding the bird head specifically, on October the 11th of 21, there's a text message thread between Ethan Crumley and that friend where he says, "Holy shit, my mom legit almost found the bird head. She pulled away the sheet covering it and was fully exposed, but IDK," meaning that I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know how the fuck she didn't see it. My dad was even in there. Jesus Christ, my heart is pounding right now. And that's in October the 11th of 21. Is that right?
Yes, sir, I recall that.
Now, you're aware that a bird head was recovered from the Oxford High School, one of the bathrooms of the Oxford High School, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that was recovered on November 11th of 21.
Correct.
So that was 1 full month after Ethan Crumley's writing about his parents almost found it in his room.
Correct.
So you were also asked about the 293-page text thread between Ethan Crumley and Jennifer Crumley.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And during the exam on February the 8th, we admitted certain portions of that text thread.
Correct.
And just so everybody's clear, the portions that were omitted did not remove certain text messages. That's a true and accurate depiction of that text message conversation from the dates that we omitted. Is that right?
Correct, yes, sir.
All right. Counsel asked you, made a point about a text from Jennifer Crumley to Ethan Crumley where it said, "I love you." Do you recall being asked that question?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you go through a Celebrate Reader Report and you export it to a PDF file, are you able to search for certain words?
Yes, sir.
Do you have the opportunity to search for the word love?
Yes, sir.
How many times did the word love pop up?
Objection.
This is so irrelevant.
Sustained.
Because they brought it up. Now, was there any discussion in the text message thread, the 293-page text message thread between Ethan Crumley and Jennifer Crumley about getting Ethan Crumley help?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay, so we already talked about the Facebook Messenger thread between these two defendants, but specifically between Ethan and Jennifer Crumley, anything in there?
No, sir.
All right, what about anything in the text message thread between Ethan Crumley and James Crumley?
No, sir.
Any talk in any of those text message conversations about getting him to a doctor?
No, sir.
We have one moment, Your Honor. Nothing for thank you, Judge.
Okay, you can step down.
Hold on.
You can step down. No reports. Great, we're going to take a quick break and then we're going to come back with the next witness. So we'll return in about 10 minutes.
Thank you, Judge.